Welcome to this week's episode of the PS We Expire podcast. I am Morgan Motzinger, and this week, I am so happy to share with you a really powerful way to shift your perspective on who you are in the world. So this last week, I thought this episode today, I was going to tell you all about my experience at the 2023 Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver. But my brain is so full of everything that I learned that I just need a little bit more time to integrate and sort through all of the amazing things that I learned, all the new things that I learned. And I will do an episode very, very soon, if not next week, on psychedelics. I feel I feel less hesitant now after going to this conference that was attended by 12,000 people, thousands of whom were clinicians, therapists, researchers, scientists, doctors, who came with capital D data for how we can understand psychedelics within like a therapeutic and scientific setting. There was a whole spectrum of people there. So that's not all that it was about, but that is something definitely that I gravitate more towards, just how I'm wired and what I'm interested in. And so as I talk about psychedelics and kind of come out of the psychedelic closet, I guess, and tell you about not only that I am interested in psychedelics, but that I also am pursuing an education where I can understand these medicines more and to be able to use them in a way to help reduce human suffering. I am so excited about it. So that will be the next episode. But believe it or not, all of this is connected. Everything that I talk about is all connected with this deep sense of worthiness, this deep sense of being interconnected, not just with all of our other humans, but also with nature, with the divine, ultimate reality, God, universe. So today, this maybe is like just a byproduct of some of the beautiful things that I've learned on my travels more towards deeper connection to myself and to others. And the lesson that I'm sharing with you today is really about like how do we combat this belief that what we are worth is based on what we're able to accomplish and what we're able to do in the world. And how my daughter Annie flipped that narrative on its head and gave me a much more true and real perspective on what it means to be human and what it means to do beautiful things in the world. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the PS We Expire podcast. I am so glad that you are here. We are human beings. We are not human doings. That may seem like a really kind of obvious distinction, but I want to share with you one of my big lessons from Annie. If you are new to my story, if you're new to the podcast, I'll just share very briefly about my daughter, Annika Rose, who, when she was 3, was diagnosed with MPS, which is a neurodegenerative rare disease that doesn't have a cure, that doesn't have any treatments. And over the course of her life, her 14-year life, I slowly watched her lose every skill that she gained. And she passed away in December of last year of 2022. And many, many things that I learned from being Annie's mother, and I learned from Annie directly because she is my best teacher. I share a lot on this podcast. Many of the things that I have learned from Annie have flipped the script on its head. So many of the things that, like in just normal human life, normal work life, normal family life, many of those things were flipped. And I realized that everything that I thought was successful and what I thought was meaningful, what I thought was going to bring joy, my life was turned upside down by being Annie's mom and by navigating this disease with her and with my other two children, with my husband and our friends and family, of course. One of the things that I want to share with you today along this line of, instead of being a human doing, we are a human being, is this understanding that Annie, my sweet Annie, was not going to have anything that she could contribute to the world in the sense of what the world usually says is successful and is a good contribution to making others' lives better. Okay, so she didn't have the ability to make money. She didn't have the ability to, quote unquote, improve herself. She didn't have the ability to get a really good career. She didn't have the ability to go to a good school. She didn't have the ability to make good grades. And yet Annie was the most present and the most magnetic person. And this is what I learned from being Annie's mom in this sense, is that at her core, she was valuable just because of who she is. And if I was going to recognize her intrinsic worth and value apart from anything that she could do in the world, I had to also acknowledge that that is true for me. That is true for every human being on the planet. That at our core, beneath all of the layers of what others can see, even just in my physical appearance, that they can see in my behavior, that they can see in my contribution, beneath all of that, and even beneath the name that my parents gave me, is this, I don't know, soul, spirit, this capital S self that exists apart from what anybody can see or perceive. And that person, that being, is infinitely valuable because it is love, it is loving, it is connected. And Annie didn't have anything that was standing in the way between herself and her experience with other people, especially in the later years of her life where she was completely dependent on us for every single one of her needs. She couldn't do anything independently. She needed us for everything. And the world will tell you that you are worth something because of what you're able to do. So that your worth is wrapped up in how hard you can work. Your worth is wrapped up in how much money you can make, or what type of business you can have, or how far you get in your career, or the type of house that you have, the kind of car that you drive. But we're missing the point. And this is why people who get to these high levels of success are frequently disappointed that it doesn't feel how they thought that it would. It doesn't feel like everything that we have been told we will feel once we have all the things that we're being told we should have. Annie didn't have any of those things, and yet she was the most present, joyful person that I knew, that I had the pleasure of being in contact with on a regular basis. So in your pursuit of doing things, I want you to remember that your value is not based on what you can accomplish, but your value is completely untouchable by any external circumstances. Your intrinsic value is untouchable by where your health is at. It's untouchable by what your body looks like. It's untouchable by what other people are saying to you or about you. It's untouchable by your relationships, whether they're great or whether they're dysfunctional or whether they're falling apart. Your intrinsic value is not touched by your performance at work. Your intrinsic value is untouched by how many followers you have on social media. Your intrinsic value is not muddied up by any of that. Your intrinsic value is unshakable. Now, what does that mean when it comes then to the things that we want to do in the world? Okay, so the energy with which we pursue the things that are important to us is very, very different, whether we come at it from a perspective of not feeling worthy, not feeling loved, not feeling connected, versus coming at it from a place where we know what our worth is. So the energy when we come to our businesses, when we come to our jobs, when we come to our relationships, that come from a place of needing those external things to make us feel whole, we will always be disappointed. And if we are always operating from a place of just perpetual disappointment, how do you think that affects how we show up in our relationships, whether they're professional or personal relationships? We are always then going to be trying to adjust our external circumstances to make us feel a certain way on the inside. There's a certain kind of scarcity energy to it when we demand that the people in our lives make us feel a certain way. There's a different kind of it almost feels like the image that comes to mind is like a black hole, right? So even a black hole, there's no light even around a black hole, because the pull of the black hole makes it so that everything gets sucked into it, and there's no light around it. So the energy with which we move through the world and we create art and we create connections and we have our relationships and our businesses, when it comes from a place of understanding and really knowing our value apart from anything else that we can do, it's a different kind of energy, because it's like an abundant energy where it says, I don't require anything from you. I don't require you to be any particular way to make me feel a certain way, because I feel that in and of myself when I'm completely alone. We come to our relationships with a different kind of energy when we feel solid in who we are. We feel solid in our worth. We don't need anybody else to validate us or make us feel good, because we do that all on our own. I will say that there's this fine line that can be a little bit dangerous if we adopt that mentality without understanding how important our interpersonal relationships are to our mental and emotional well-being. Then we can become hyper individualistic and refuse to need anybody, because we think, well, I'm whole in and of myself. Right? So if we adopt this mentality that it doesn't matter what other people say because I'm untouched by that, that is not really the energy that I'm talking about. The energy that I'm talking about says that we can love other people for exactly who they are. It also says that when we understand our self-worth, we have appropriate boundaries. We become very, very boundaried people when we understand our own worth. With Annie, I mean, I think this is a really good way to illustrate this, is I was in charge of setting up the boundaries for her, because she wasn't able to do that on her own. So I was always cognizant and always aware and always thinking about who was spending time with her, who was taking care of her. I was really, really picky about who was going to be safeguarding her in school, who was going to be in our home with her, how people interacted with her in our extended family, how my other children interacted with her. I was really very protective of her with that. I was very, 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 it was easy for me to set up boundaries for her because I knew that she couldn't do that for herself. And I knew that Annie's life, even though I didn't know that she was going to die when she was 14, I knew from the time that she was 3 that she was not going to live to be an adult. I knew that. And so I became really clear about what I wanted her life to look like. I got really clear about the types of things that I wanted her to be involved in. I got really clear about the types of experiences that I wanted her to have. And I didn't do this perfectly. There are many things that I wish that I had done differently in service of giving her a really beautiful life. But I do believe that I did what I had capacity to do and what I had the tools available to do for her. And even when she was very young and I realized this, for her, I really started to adopt that same template to my own life. And it was a slower transition for me as I started to realize that everything that I believed was true for Annie's life was also true for mine. So Annie's life is very short. My life is very short in comparison to not just human history, but the whole scope of eternity. This life is very, very short. And so I started to ask myself these same types of questions, is like, I want every day to be filled with connection and with love and with being able to do things that make me feel alive and that feel really joyful and happy to me. I want to have experiences that make me feel so connected with my humanity. I want to have experiences that make me feel connected with others. I want to have experiences that make me feel connected with nature and with my world. I started to pursue things that I found exciting to me. So one of the examples is I really, from the time that I was little, I was always really fascinated by motorcycles, but I didn't grow up around anything like that. And I guess it's about 4 years ago now, as I continued to implement this same mentality that I had towards Annie's life of just like, what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for to pursue the things that are interesting to us? What are we waiting for to pursue the things that are exciting to us? Why are we waiting to take these trips? Why are we waiting to take these classes? Why are we waiting to learn new things? Why are we waiting to tell people that we love them? Why are we waiting? Why are we waiting? Why are we waiting? And I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but for me, as I realized, like, okay, life is really short. What am I interested in? What am I waiting? What am I waiting for? I decided to stop waiting. So I went and took a motorcycle endorsement class, got my motorcycle endorsement. And turns out riding a motorcycle is one of the like biggest joys of my life. It's so fun. I was in Colorado recently and rented a motorcycle for the day and got to ride around in the Colorado mountains and saw some beautiful things, some amazing landscapes, got to ride this great bike that was so much fun. And I think, what is it that is keeping us from doing those things? So a big one is fear, right? We are afraid of, oh man, we're afraid of many things. And sometimes I think that we don't even take the time to understand what we are afraid of. So we just have this like sense of fear or dread, and we don't even take the time to unpack that. And we just allow that to stop us from pursuing things that we're interested in, right? It is really an interesting exercise to force yourself to admit, what are you afraid of? Why am I not doing this thing? What exactly am I afraid of? Sometimes it's bodily harm, right? I mean, I can see that my fear of getting hurt while riding a motorcycle perhaps kept me from pursuing getting my license to ride a motorcycle. The fear of, just the dangers that are inherently part of riding a motorcycle. But when we think about things like quitting our job to maybe start our own business, or quitting our job because we want to pursue a career in a totally different industry, or when we have fear about saying difficult things in our relationships because we don't know how that's going to change them, when we have a lot of fear about telling the truth of what our experience is. And fear is also a very good, like, best friend with shame. Shame is shame is what keeps us quiet. Shame is what keeps us hiding parts of ourselves. Shame is what keeps our experiences in the dark because we're afraid that if we share them, then we don't know how people are going to respond. We don't know who's going to be there to catch us as we kind of fall apart as we're managing big emotions or processing experiences or addressing trauma for the first time. Shame keeps us quiet and keeps us small and keeps us hidden. And this understanding that at our core, we are good and we are whole gives us courage to not only, pursue the things out here that we find exciting, but it gives us courage to tell the truth about our internal experience. It gives us the courage to tell the truth about the things that we do find interesting, and helps us tell the truth about the areas where we don't feel fulfilled or satisfied. It gives us the courage to change. Knowing my worth gives me the courage to change my relationships in the way that I need to. It gives me the courage to be introspective in a way that doesn't feel quite so heavy. Like if I wasn't sure about my intrinsic worth, I would feel much more hesitant to do really hard work in therapy, for instance. I would be much less open and inclined to tell the truth in my relationships because I wouldn't know if I'm going to be okay. Knowing your intrinsic worth is actually, I think, a really important piece of being resilient. When we understand at our core that there's nothing that I could do that is going to diminish my worth, we become more able to handle the highs and lows of life, because what's happening out here in my circumstances in my life can't do anything to uproot or change or diminish or squash who I am, who I really am. Some of you may be wondering, how do I develop this sense of self-worth? Okay, I hear you, Morgan. That's great. Yes, I hear that it's important for me to regard myself as worthy. I hear you say that it's important for me to love myself, but how do I actually do that? The ways that come to mind, number one, is to serve others. And I'm not talking about the type of like pseudo service that we do where we completely run ourselves into the ground, always in helping other people, always in putting other people first, whether they're clients or, our managers or bosses or employees or whatever, or even our children. So I'm not saying that, because that is, and I say that's a pseudo service because many of us do those things in an attempt to feel worthy. What I'm talking about is from a place of knowing our worth and wanting to share that love of self with other people. Service is a great way for us to stop navel gazing, I guess, and be so wrapped up in our own heads about like, what are other people thinking of me? And am I on the right path? And all of this stuff, and helps us just open up to the reality that there are so many people in this world and that we are all connected through our shared humanity. So service is a great one. Another really wonderful one is just to think about what I said about my daughter. Think about the beliefs that we have about our worthiness being dependent on what we're able to contribute. And remember that there are many people in the world who are not able to, quote unquote, contribute or be successful, and that doesn't mean anything about their worth as a human. In fact, many people who are in those realities are our greatest teachers about what's really important. And I think many people who either are parents of special needs children or maybe a sibling or have worked with folks who are disabled will tell you the same thing that I'm telling you, is that society has got a lot of this backwards. That children in particular, and also the other layer with children with special needs, teach us the most valuable lessons in life and teach us much about ourselves. So service, being around people and serving people who cannot do anything for you in return. I also think being much more in tune to your internal dialogue. That's a really big one. That's a really, really big one, because many of us are just largely unaware of the terrible shit that we tell ourselves. Things that we would never in a million years say to someone that we love, we say to ourselves. We are harder on ourselves than we are on anybody else. We say more terrible things that somehow we think are going to motivate us to do better. We say those things to ourselves, even though, like, I would say, like, data-driven results that show how damaging that type of talk is to, like, even like in a school environment, that people are much more motivated by positive reinforcement, by trying really hard and being validated for their effort, not for their results. There's so much evidence that that is much more powerful than saying terrible things. And yet we don't really turn the lens back on ourselves and be really cognizant of the ways that we are talking to ourselves. So that I think is probably one of the most important things that we can do, is to develop the skill of, like, tuning that inner ear to listen to the things that we say to ourselves and to change that. Sometimes we're not even really aware of what we're saying until we write them down. So just really practically, a great way to do this is through automatic writing. So journaling, yes, and then automatic writing is when you do not allow your pen to stop. So you take out a piece of paper and you set a timer for 5 minutes. Geez, even like 1 minute is going to be really difficult if you've never done this before. So just give it a try, but you literally cannot allow yourself to stop writing. So you can come to this exercise with something on your mind that is bothering you, or something on your mind that is, kind of keeping you in these thought loops, and set your timer and just start writing. And you will likely be very amazed at what comes up. So the area of your brain that lights up when you put a pen to paper is the same area of your brain that lights up when you meditate, which I think is just phenomenal and so fascinating, that you can tap into that same kind of like subconscious looping, or subconscious, like the feeding of the thoughts into your conscious mind. You get to tap into that a little bit when you do automatic writing. So just developing some like really practical ways to understand and listen to that internal dialogue more, and start to change it, just start to tweak it a little bit. So when you recognize, I don't think that the goal really, this is a really lofty goal, that we would never say mean shit to ourselves. But what I think is more important is when you catch yourself saying it and then you tell yourself something different. So I had a moment maybe a couple of weeks ago where I started to get really angry about something. And before doing a lot of this like introspective work and being more self-aware, I just wouldn't allow myself to get mad. I would like cram that down, put the lid back on real tight. Don't be angry about anything. That's not okay. And as I have understood like how emotion works, how emotion gets stored in our body when we don't process it, when we don't allow it, when we don't ask the questions beneath why we're feeling certain things, instead of just saying like, don't feel that. What I'm starting to do is, or what I had started to do is ask myself, well, why do I feel like that? What does that feel like? Where am I feeling that in my body? What is that showing me? A lot of times I feel anger right in my throat, which to me, like I have seen time and time again that a lot of anger crops up when I'm not saying what I really want to say. So a lot of it lives right here in my throat, or I feel it right in my throat. So I had this experience where I was getting really angry about something and I was allowing myself to feel it. And I had this like image of Morgan in front of me that was like 10, 11, 12. And she was so angry. And I stepped into the role as my capital S self, as the aligned, valued, valuable, intrinsic worth, someone who knows their intrinsic worth, stepped into that role to address my 10, 11, 12-year-old angry self, angry part of me. And I validated her and I spoke back to her what she was feeling. And I hugged her and I comforted her. That was a really powerful moment for me because it was like this, I wasn't telling her to go away, which is what I had done for years. I told those parts of myself that were mad to go away. They weren't welcome. They weren't allowed to be here. You can't behave like that. You can't feel that. Go away. Go away. And I didn't do that. I allowed her to say exactly what she needed to say. And I know that's kind of weird to talk about myself in the third person like that, but that's how it feels when we're processing. There's a really amazing therapeutic tool called internal family systems that if you have never heard of this, I highly recommend looking into this. So Richard Schwartz is the therapist who developed this system, this way of understanding all the different parts of ourself. And he talks about how we have all these parts of ourselves that when they're in their natural state are operating in a way that is exactly how it's supposed to be. They're all balanced and they're all connected. And what happens when we're children is that these parts of ourselves are knocked out of their natural states and they're forced to compensate for, whatever trauma has come our way, that we have parts of ourselves then that we exile, and we have other parts of ourselves that become overinflated in an attempt to protect the smaller, weaker parts that were exiled. So it's a lot more granular than that, but that's, I think, probably a good way to describe this therapy system. And so in the case of me addressing my younger self who was really angry, I'm integrating that part of myself back into the whole. And going back to the original part of what this whole podcast episode was about, was understanding our intrinsic worth. In internal family systems, he would describe that person as the capital S self, that person who is unwavering in their understanding of how much they are loved and held and perfectly fine. that capital S self is the one who gets to direct the rhythms of all the other parts of ourselves. And the more that we can understand our true self and lean into and seek wisdom in the intuition and the guidance from that self, the better off we're going to be. When that is what allows us to stop, compensating for our sense of worthlessness by working super hard, or by always saying yes, by not being boundaried, by having codependent relationships, by operating in these patterns of conflict and anger and rage in our relationships, in our ways that we push people away by our behavior because we have learned that is how to be safe in the world. So the more that we can come back into true alignment and understanding of who we are at our core, beneath all the layers, the more joy filled and integrated our life is going to be. So Annie, yeah, Annie's my greatest teacher. So as you are pursuing more depth in your understanding of who you are in the world, this is the most important work that you will do, because this work that you do to understand yourself and really, really believe the best about yourself changes how you show up in every area of your life. When we become less self-judgmental, we become less judgmental of others. When we talk to ourselves in a more kind way, we talk to others in a more kind way. When we have more compassion for all the parts of ourselves that we have pushed away, that we have minimized, that we have neglected, the more that we understand that about ourselves, the more we understand that about other people, the more that we understand how our childhood patterns and traumas inform the patterns that we perpetuate as adults, the more we have that understanding for others. These are all tools of becoming a more connected and compassionate person in the world. And the work that you do from a place of deep self-worth and self-trust and self-love has exponential results. It has ripple effects that go far beyond what you could possibly imagine, because in the pursuit of healing yourself, you show others how to do the same. In the pursuit of healing yourself, others heal themselves. And I mean, can you imagine for a moment people who are invested in understanding human suffering and trying to alleviate that first through understanding our own suffering and alleviating that through self-love? That makes for a good world. It makes for a good world. So that's my message today on this episode. It is worth the introspective journey, the self-awareness journey is, I would say, is not only worth it, it is imperative to creating the things in the world that you want to create. Continue to find things that light you up. Ask yourself, why am I not doing those? In pursuit of healing and wholeness and joy. In pursuit of joy. We don't do that often enough. We think, I don't know, maybe I'll talk about this on another episode, but we have this like backwards perspective that like suffering is like the best thing that we could do. And it's not. I am happy to be in a place where I am pursuing reducing my own suffering and the suffering of others. So thanks for joining me. And before we go, yes.